the framework has been clearly spelled out during these first three speeches. So we have now to see how we can concretely go into some actions. You know, I'm an engineer, so I'm a builder, somebody who wants to do things that are concrete, not only discuss about things. So, but here we are also to discuss and find concrete action. So I would like to make reference to start with in our conversation with what Ursula von der Leyen has announced, that the EU should be fit for the digital age. And I mean, now that's clear. In fact, I would say, this is me and not her, we should lead in the digital age. I mean, instead of being only followers. I mean, we have all the tools to be leaders instead of being followers. So how can Europe gain digital sovereignty, face the speed of innovation, and grow in a globalized competition? This is the question to the panelists I would like to start with, because this is very important. It is at the crossroad of content creation, innovation at technology level, and regulation. So I would like to start from our Member of Parliament, Eva Kaili, and start from you. I mean, what's your view?
So thank you for organizing this event. I think it's really important because we are also the week of the hearings. It can give us a better understanding of what are your concerns. Today I'm asking Commissioner Vestager about specific things for the digital era and competition law. So it's been very useful to see that it's really something that we need to clarify how we're gonna have our strategy set for the next 7 years. I can tell you that first of all, yes, I agree it's money. We're increasing a bit the budget, not enough, if I may say so, because I think what is strong for Europe, it's cultural identity and all the industry around that. We're also forgetting the luxury brands. They are globally competitive, I would say actually leading in the global market. So I think we need to support it even more because you can create growth and improve also this with innovative solutions, this market, and create also more jobs. When we talk about sovereignty, I think that we have to make sure, and this is going to be one of my questions, that we don't talk about overprotection with overregulation. We talk about keeping it open, but at the same time achieve reciprocity to make sure that we don't follow the rules just in Europe. And when European companies go outside to be globally competitive, they don't have the same approach that we have when multinationals come to Europe and they are really competitive with different rules and terms. So I think we have things to fix, but definitely having a budget improve from 1.45 to 1.8 billion. But for 6-7 years, maybe it's not enough, but it's an increase. So I think it's also very important to understand how rapidly the emerging technologies are transforming every sector and also the media sector. You know that I've seen already many concerts with holograms of artists or dancers, and you've seen artificial intelligence creating these deep fakes that nobody can tell the difference now these days. You can have movies or conferences or interviews with the people that they are not real, or they are basically real, and we have, a fake hologram of them saying whatever they want them to say. So I do believe we have to educate people, we have to support stronger this sector, and of course we have to understand all these new challenges we have. I can go more in depth on AI, but I think it would be a follow-up question.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I would like to underline one point that you have touched, is this idea of synergies among leading industries in Europe. I mean, you mentioned the luxury industry, which is leader on a worldwide basis. We can also mention the automotive industry, for example. And if you take the media industry and you combine it with the automotive industry, we can set an industry which is leader on a worldwide basis, and we could impose, between inverted commas, our view to the market worldwide without the need of being necessarily only protected by regulations or constrained by regulations. And speaking about this, I mean, coming back to the sovereignty and the regulations and the media policy, I would like to turn to Giuseppe Abbamonte and say, what is view on this?
Right. So my answer to your question would be that Europe should invest even more in new digital technologies and incentivize uptake in the media sector. So to give you an example, there is an open call in Horizon 2020 for 5.5 million euros to support the creation and development of incubators and sandboxes within media companies. And this will facilitate really the collaboration between technologists and content producers. And there is something that should go down very well in this room because it mirrors one of the strands of MediaRoad, the sandbox hub. You know, as the professor before me said, you know, media is not just important for the economy, it's important for our cultural identity, and it is also important for the integrity of our democracies. And, you know, as a media director at the European Commission, I would propose to any future political master, well, you know, if my future political master would be Commissioner Gabrielle, she would be already persuaded, so it would be like preaching to the converted. But it will be, I would really preach to make sure that media receives adequate funding and innovation in media is adequately supported to reflect the importance of the sector. So I would say that media should be, and there is something that I put in all the briefings also, so I really believe in it, media should be the test bed for innovative technologies, so ranging from, you know, virtual reality to machine translation, so language management, to artificial intelligence for better personalization of content, marketing and distribution. So given the fact that, you know, we have proposed an increase in budget across all the programs, now ranging from you know, research to Creative Europe to InvestEU, which is brand new. But you know, money will always be limited, and so what we need to do is to be more joined up, so to optimize usage of funds and programs. So we need, for example, to make sure that the media program is used to fund films which make use of innovative technologies. Media companies and content creators could also be involved in the development of such technologies to make sure that they are fit for more rapid exploitation and launch on the market. And last but not least, there is also InvestEU, which will contain the guarantee facility for the CCIs, which has been a great success. Also, but I will stop here, is to facilitate really the collaboration between European content companies and connectivity providers, so to make sure that, you know, everything that we do is very well distributed and reach out the right audiences.
Thank you. So now I'd like to turn to Professor Karen Donders and ask, what are we missing in all this search for sovereignty? Because you started pinpointing a few things that we are missing. So just to animate our discussion, I mean, what are the elements that we are missing?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think a lot of things are happening, so I don't want to be the negativo in the room, but I'll do my best to be it nonetheless. Well, I think perhaps what's missing is a bit the importance of education. Obviously, being from a university, I think that also we should be self-critical about ourselves, in the sense that a lot of the education that we have on offer is still very much discipline separate. I mean with that, engineers like you spend 5 years separate from media scholars like me. That's just one example, but we don't meet each other except when we go for drinks later in the evening, which obviously is very nice, but it doesn't. So I also think that university education, and you see some first signs, but it's really going too slow, and I really think we should be self-critical there also, that university education should become more digital focused, more interdisciplinary in nature. I think that's really, really very important. And I also think, secondly, and there is an area I think where it goes wrong a bit the last few years, there should be more complementarity between what at the EU level is being done and what is being done at the member state level. Now, I know that's easier said than done because you have this nasty thing of member state sovereignty. No, I think it's something very good. But you do see that, for example, a lot of EU member states are decreasing their investments in research, also in fundamental research. That is very, very important to keep the innovation process going. Now, if the European Commission, and I can only applaud that, is increasing the investments at the same time, the net effect is actually not an increase what you would actually hope for to happen. So I think that complementarity between what is happening at the national level and what is happening at the European level, even if it is very difficult, that is something that we should have a look at. I'll give one more very brief example, I promise, if you look at investments in startups, you see that is obviously something that Europe is focusing on, rightfully so, but you also see that member states and regions are doing stuff. And you see an immense fragmentation. And then you get an emergence of companies that need to help startups, so that develop a business model out of getting startups money. I think if you would put all of that money together at the European level, you should, well, not all of it, but a lot of it, you could much more go into real investment climate. Whereas now all member states are really focused on finding their own next unicorn. It's still not a European thought. They all want to have their own unicorn, and probably actually a couple of them. And that is really undermining, I think, the cohesiveness of European policy in this area.
Yes, and I would like to stress the fact that it's also reducing scale, because in reality, when you disperse funds from different sources, what you do is you are just distributing in smaller quantities, and then the reach of a unicorn becomes more complex because you cannot aggregate enough money. Dieter, in your wildest dream, I mean, in terms of establishing sovereignty, what would you add to what has been said, and what would you propose as a new, a new thing that should be done that has not been mentioned before? I mean, what's your view on this?
Well, I think the most important thing now is to add scale. So we proved on a number of projects that we can do stuff. For instance, there are people in here that build a network of 18 accelerators throughout Europe. So the story that you cannot work multi-language, multi-culture all over Europe, it's not true. People proved that it can be different. Karen said it's very important to combine creative with technology. I don't do any innovation project without a media brand and a real television, radio, or digital format being in the project. It really works. The only thing is that this is not a practice. A lot of innovation is done in technical labs. That makes no sense at all. So it would help to also scale that. And then the third one, and maybe that's the most important one to scale, why don't we Europeans dare to tell our own stories? Do we really want digital identity to be owned by a state like in Asia, or by big companies like in the States? Or do we want our identity to be our own and shareable? And there are ideas about that. I had the honor to work to collaborate on a report for former Commissioner Ansip on that. There are technological possibilities, and there is also a possible drive to make identity closer to the citizen again. And that could be a model, I think, that could prosper in Europe, because it's very close to our values and to our pluralistic view on things. So I think it's not, we don't have to start new things. We should look at people that do very good things and scale them with budgets. and really get people together, because I don't believe in big platforms. It are people that are running, and maybe in times of climate change not that good, but flying all over Europe and talking to people and bringing people together. So that's the job to be done.
Thank you, Dieter. So this is a very good transition to the second subject I wanted to touch, and this is about social media and the platforms for social media that are dominated by companies that are outside Europe. I mean, we should not hide behind a finger. I mean, there isn't almost any platform that is strong in Europe there. And this is, to me, a real big challenge, because the source of information very often is limited to those platforms. And those platforms, on top of profiting from the data that they are able to collect, they are able to drive the interest of people, and the young generation in particular, but in general nowadays. So how can we tackle this? How can we regain a sort of leadership in the area of social media? What should we do there? Because this is one of the very painful subjects for me to be tackled. Eva.
Yes, thank you. This is really an important question. I will try to connect it to the previous discussion, because we already have a big budget besides the creative industries to increase the risk that VCs will take to invest in new projects. So basically we talk about the scale up, and we have EIC, European Innovation Council, trying to do that, basically support VCs taking risky decisions and try to create a better industry in Europe, so to avoid, after the startups manage to have some success, to leave, to go to Silicon Valley. So I think this is already important. We don't include it in the creative industry, but I think it will actually help a lot any industry in Europe, and especially the ones we are we have an important work to show. And we do have to work a bit more. We have the STARTS program, Science, Technology and Arts. It's very successful. We try to create academies to have scientists and designers to find and figure out basically new business models or new materials to experiment a bit more. We have to increase the budget there for sure, because we lack in education in this sector. I have to agree with the previous speakers. And yes, we did it cross-border. It's 5 or 6 countries that already participate. But we have to overcome also some obstacles that other countries don't have. For example, we have 24 different languages, which is we can overcome when we meet, but at the same time we have different understanding of rules, different legislations, tax systems. So we really need to make a decision to move forward together. So we need an IFPI to protect the intellectual property cross-border, to make sure that you can protect your content easily and not, just in your national, your member state. So you have to make sure that your work is protected and you get paid for what people use from your content. In the social platforms, what's happening is that actually it removes these barriers. So I think it's a transformative, of course, technology. It brings us into this revolution that we cannot stop, where there is no geo-blocking. We are sharing most of the content. We have to work more there to make sure that the small companies, they can actually have access to these kind of platforms. But we already have GDPR, so I would say, in a way, we are leading in this sector. Maybe we have to make it smarter and more adaptable to not stifle innovation. This is one of something that worries me a lot, and I'm trying to make sure that we will protect the smaller companies to enter and be competitive to these big platforms. But at the same time, big platforms can really be useful to also promote and enter a global market. So what I think we should do is to have smart regulation that can be outsourced. We have to make sure that we will work, based on by principle, not to be too strict, but to have some principles there. We can use new technologies like blockchain in the platforms. Can I say an example? You have Netflix or you have YouTube, and somebody has his video there. You are having millions of users, but he gets basically something close to nothing for his content. the moment you want to have your content protected, because you might not, in the beginning you want it to be viral, you don't want to be paid because you're getting a lot of publicity. But the moment you want to be paid for your content, to be able to be paid directly in your wallet with blockchain technologies, it would be really a revolution, and we have the technology to achieve that. You can have your content time-stamped. You can understand when and who access your content at any time. When I say timestamp, I go back to the deepfakes because I don't know if everybody understands. Timestamps means when I upload a video and it's authenticated from original source, I can basically have a proof forever that it was that point, that time, and I have the origin and nobody can change or alter that. So it creates a trustworthy system that can really help in the media sector, also for journalists, because I don't want to go just to the creative industries. So I think we have a lot of things to do. The platforms need smart regulation. We have to make sure that citizens understand how their data and then their likes and their content is being used. We do suffer from the problem of the platforms through Cambridge Analytica case, where you have targeted advertisement, personalized. So I think we need some ethics there when it's concerning not just political reasoning, but also, you know, we did a study in STOA, Science Technology Options Assessment. We have a committee that we try to evaluate new technologies. And what is becoming more viral is something that has a strong feeling, especially fear. So if you have nasty content, or if you scare people, this can be really become viral very fast. It can also alter your perception. It doesn't need to be fake. So we have to be smarter than that. You can just have a huge quantity of negative content or of content against migration, for example, with accurate things, but like too much information on that and less on positive things, that this could alter people's perception and create to difficult and tragic, maybe sometimes, results in an election or more things. So if we understand how algorithms work and we manage to set some principles there, I think we can use the platform economy to help also European companies that having difficulties to enter the global market to do so. And that's why I talked about reciprocity. We cannot have Google, Amazon, Facebook, everybody entering the European market following no rules and have the European companies struggling with our legislation. We have to find a balance there.
Thank you very much. And I mean, this links to what we discussed before about public service that is providing the trusted source of information, but at the same time, there is a need of visibility. And in this platform, sometimes the visibility is lost, and if you become number 23 in the list of things that are accessible, then you are almost invisible. So this has to do with the regulation, this has to do with the way in which you can be prominent in a platform or not. And and I turn to and the algorithms, yes, and I turn to Giuseppe. I mean, we are producing in Europe, just for the public broadcasters, I mean, we are spending almost 20 billion euros in production every year, but this is fragmented, and then there are the rules for the copyright protection and so on, and in the end this is not, it's difficult to monetize in an easy way. So what you were saying about blockchain, but any other technology that could help copyright management and speed up this process will be helpful. So Giuseppe, what's your view on this area of how do we tackle this problem with the social networks, and how can we be visible again?
Well, it's a very broad question. So with your permission, maybe I can focus a little bit on the regulatory aspects. Well, Karen was a little negative when she spoke about the regulation before, and I didn't understand why, because really the purpose of all the regulatory efforts which were deployed by the European Commission in the field of copyright, in the field of AVMSD, are really aimed at creating a more level playing field, enhancing the visibility of European content, and they are about monetization. So are about basically a more fair distribution of the revenues which are generated by content, which very often is European, on the American platforms. So the sharing basically of the advertising revenues. There is clearly the case for the copyright reform. We have, a brand new press publishers right, the aim of which is to enable press publishers to negotiate, fairer, but also, better monetization agreements with with the American news aggregators. And the famous or infamous, depending on the angle, Article 17 provision, which really aims at rebalancing the market and achieving, a more fair distribution of revenues between the large American platforms and the European right holders. For AVMSD, well, I really don't see what could be the unintended consequences for European companies, because the AVMSD provides for the first, one of the main objectives is the promotion of European content. You have a quota, 30%, at least 30% of the catalog of VOD providers must consist of European works, and they have to give prominence to these European works. So the works have to be visible. As you said, they have to be easily accessible. And then you have all the issue of, well, I don't know if you want to discuss it now, all the issue of disinformation. I mean, Eva Kaili said that we are leading on that, and I think she's right. I mean, we have a code of practice on disinformation. It has been a struggle to get this code of practice, but we are the only region in the world which has such a code of practice. You may say the code has, has bits which are good, which are better than others, but still, I mean, the European elections were contaminated much less than the Brazilian elections, the American elections, by the phenomenon of disinformation, and it is also because of the code of practice. I can speak about platforms forever because it is the bread, but I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe. So now, sure, please.
Yes, I would like perhaps to stress that I think a lot of good things have happened at the European level, and it's always better to at least take action than to do nothing, because you know that policy is always imperfect. So I think that definitely a lot of the efforts under AVMSD, Copyright Directive, GDPR are applaudable. But I think they do not address, and it's also very difficult to do that, one of the basic issues, and that is the economic nature and finality of super platforms. They are based on the premise of accumulation of intermediation and gatekeeping to control ecosystems. If you read all economics literature on platforms, not only in the media sector, but also outside in retail, that is basically what they are about. And that is not something you can address with adding rules to the AVMSD, to the Copyright Directive, to the GDPR, even though that is better than not doing anything. I agree with that completely. And to solve that, we should really think very carefully about whether we can accept certain concentrations of power. Because at the extreme, that's really an illness. And what we are doing is trying to deal with the symptoms, but we're not curing the illness. I'm not saying we should abolish all platforms here for sake of clarity, but there is a point in saying that some of these super platforms have become so big that whatever you try to do as a policymaker, it will not suffice to tackle the basic fundamental problem. You will not solve that with the AVMSD. You will not solve it only with media literacy policies. That will just not do the trick, in my very modest opinion.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's very, passionate plea for this, and I think we need to do something in this direction. I would like now to move to the area of, it has been underlined already. I mean, our weakness is fragmentation in Europe. I mean, that's where we are weak, but at the same time, we have a cultural diversity. And the fragmentation is also, could be a value. I mean, we said before in the introduction, in the area of news, for example, if we use tools like the Eurovox one that we are presenting here, the possibility of having tens of sources for the same news, it's a very interesting tool to give a diverse source of information, and so to increase democracy and to also fight against disinformation. So in a way, this is one of the big advantages we have. And also in the creative industry in general, at once we would solve the problem of copyright management, of course, and how can we provide content to other countries and so on. So maybe there are areas there where something can be improved. But the key point is, how can we scale up our media industry? How can we use innovation to scale up our media industry to solve this problem of scale, this problem of not being comparable with respect to the big platforms? How can we play against this? How can we have a voice in all this? Dieter?
Well, I think the most important thing is that innovation is doing things.
Yes.
So it's really starting up things. Some things will work, others won't. But as I already said, some things work now. Let's scale them. And all the talk we've been doing, I learned today since '94 and even earlier that you cannot scale diversity and pluralism. You can. I'm pretty sure that we have value in that, and that if you would tell a story as a European Commission that we will make Europe flourish again, and we will make everything that's out there to their optimal value, and we make mechanisms that can scale, because it's about mechanisms, and you can scale. People are interested in diverse cultures, in diverse storytellers. The only ones that are building mechanisms now to scale them are people like Netflix. It's our fault that we don't do that also. We will be better in that. We will know the right people. We will know how to do it. So it is possible. But I think multi-country, multi-language mechanisms of people that are there for a number of years, that are supported, that's the way to go. And although we think it's very difficult to do something with Belgians, French, UK people, Scandinavian, etc. together, it is possible. We just should put more effort, I think, in the networking and in the working together, also more money in that, and less in the technology itself. Something which is also done in, for instance, the American models. It is not the companies that are the big ones that do the research. They assemble and they do product development. And there's a very good system throughout their universities, throughout their military, etc., that makes research money into products. So that is, I think, these systems, how do they work and what could work for Europe is maybe interesting to look at, because I didn't do the studies, but I think a lot of technology research and investment is done here, but the translation into mass products that scale and have high margins, maybe we can set some steps there. Absolutely,
and this idea, of a European platform that could federate more content coming from different countries is something we've been hearing about a lot. At the same time, this is a typical tendency in Europe. We discuss for many, many years before we decide for something when it's a bit maybe too late. So should we move, and this is a question for Eva, more in the direction of shooting first and aiming later like they do in California, or should we keep on using our European model of discussing for a long time and in the meantime having, it's called now blue ocean strategy, you think something, you do it, and then you adapt your direction while you are doing it. Is there something missing in the way in which the European way of developing things is happening? Are we missing something there, and we should improve?
Of course, if there is nothing to improve, why we're here?
Yes.
But let me also say that we have to make some decisions about what kind of quality of industry we want to have. And if we really want a market similar to US or China, where things are happening really fast and there are no problems such as the European problems, but at the same time, I'm not sure citizens would prefer that kind of model where you can violate everyone's privacy without taking permission or consent. So we have to find this gold balance. I would say that what we have to avoid, and I will be working on these files next 5 years, it would be to avoid the one size fits all. So it's different how to treat data in the health sector. It's different how you treat data for creative industries. It's different how you treat data for autonomous weapons or vehicles. So we have to make sure that we don't have one regulation that would fit everything about data. So first we have to understand data, the different uses, and maybe start talking about data ownership in a different way. So to make sure that citizens will start to understand how their data are being used. And of course we need sandboxes. Unfortunately, yes, we are really late. We are delaying. And this is a problem of the European Union because you have to let go of the control you have as a member state to achieve that. So unfortunately, this is not just the Parliament's job or the Commission's, we also have the Council to be willing to do that. So for example, if you have a very strong industry or association in Germany or France, maybe you don't want to have a market that you don't control and you have smaller players coming up, maybe. Or maybe you want the big platforms to die so that you can have small platforms there and you can be competitive, but is this what we want? So these are like some questions, maybe philosophical, but we have to decide what kind of Europe we want. So I would say we have to be faster, solve some problems, remove some digital barriers that we should not even have, make sure we will create sandboxes for content providers and for the creative industries, that they will be able, you know, to work without being scared that the regulation could change and they would have problems. But at the same time, try also to follow the principles we initiated with the GDPR. And as I said, we have to understand that I would disagree with the articles 17, 13, all these articles that are filtering too much the internet. So my point of view would be that one thing is to protect the people that create content, and the second thing is to filter internet and have, you know, black blurred photos or videos when it's not clear copyrights are violated, or it's not really clear that this is actually generating a lot of profit for the platform, but at the same time you have to block it. So I don't understand this. I think it's a very democratic way, and we have to follow, you know, the innovation. I don't think we should be faster than innovation, because then we would make it impossible to innovate. Innovation is like thinking out of the box, and us trying to be smarter and faster in our regulation to protect citizens, not industries, not politicians. You have to protect democracy.
Thank you. I think we'll stop our conversation among ourselves and leave the floor to some questions that you may have, and this is what should also be the interactivity there. So any question from the floor? There's a question down there, on the right there. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Marijn Duivenstein from the European Commission, and I have a question for Mr. Boen, or otherwise Ms. Donders. I just wanted to understand really well how this bridge can be built. How can this bridge be built to invest in tech as well as in content? Is it also a matter of standard setting? Because we've seen that the more you have common standards, the more diverse models can prevail, because I sometimes have the impression we talk a bit about a false dilemma. On the one hand, we have the small players. On the other hand, we have an impossible challenge to compete with US platforms. So, as a consequence, we conclude that we cannot do much, but maybe we should focus on common standards to gradually move in the economic system.
I will give a practical answer on that. Yes, it helps a lot, but maybe standards are different now than they used to be. I think EBU still does a very good job together with SMIT in Hollywood to make worldwide standards on broadcasting. If you go more to an internet app software world, standards are more products that we use all together. I'll give a very good example. One of the media parts that we don't pay like 30 to 40% to Silicon Valley companies is radio. And radio is now going to audio very fast. I think projects like UK radio player that are now rolled out over Europe and used by many companies, it's a very good way to work together, and it's, I think, a de facto standard because they can talk to car manufacturers, etc. But it's an app, it's not like a document anymore. So I think that kind of work is very important and can bring a lot of economic value.
Yes, I also perhaps want to follow up on the example of radio and audio, because I think it's a very good example of how you can bridge tech content and let's say business model innovation. I'll give an example of a concrete project that also some of the people in the audience are involved in. H Radio, it's a Horizon 2020 funded project that really deals with enhancement, let's say, of radio, but it's really tech teams working together with content teams and with living labs and business modeling teams. And I think it's really a best practice in the sense that what used to happen before is that you had wonderful stuff being done by engineers, really genius stuff. And then it appeared, after all of the money was poured in, that nobody wanted to use it. I'm now exaggerating a bit, but that is what really very often happened. And by bridging, let's say, the needs of people working on media and content and the brand people, the marketing people, with the engineers, but also to test stuff in a living lab environment. We have wonderful European living labs. They're also connected in web networks, so that is very positive. But by doing that, you can really create meaningful innovation and valorization, because obviously the valorization aspect of innovation is very important. So that is, for me, one of the examples, one of the best practices of how you can actually do innovation in a very meaningful way, and where you also see that all of the things, this is a chance for me to be positive, I should seize it, where you see that all of these things, also European policy and support, really kind of come together and work towards a common goal and a common outcome, and that is wonderful to see. So I'm not saying it's a mission impossible. I think a lot is possible also within Europe, but we have to go more along these lines, yeah.
I think this is a fundamental part, and I was mentioning the 5G Media Action Group this morning. This is exactly the attempt to translate a standard that exists at the level of 3GPP, so it's a worldwide standard, into tangible services, commercial services. So we are not going to re-standardize anything. The standard exists, is how to go from the paper to the delivery of services, which is another fundamental part. So this could be for video production, for example, how we plug a camera into a 5G modem, and this is interoperable, working and smoothly guaranteeing an SLA, a level of service for the customers. At the same time, for 5G broadcasting, how do we use the 3GPP standard to reach 100% of the population, to cover 100% of a country? I mean, this is another important part, and it's only by taking the standard and bringing to the actual deployment in operational terms that we can manage and transform an idea into money. We have made mistakes in the past. We have learned a lot there, like DVBH was one of these in the past, and we are learning that the standard alone is not enough. We need to translate it into tangible result. Other questions? Either we've been too clear or we have been putting people sleeping. Don't be shy. If there is no other question, I would like to thank our panelists. Thank you very much. The conversation is very interesting. We could continue for another hour, but I have to say stay within the time limits of our panel. So thank you very much to all our guests, and thank you to you for listening. And there is a coffee break now, and it will be a moment to see all the demonstrations on the other side and to exchange among ourselves, which is one of the fundamental parts of working together. Thank you again. Thank you very much.